two U.S. Navy pilots were shot down Sunday over the Red Sea in an apparent friendly fire incident. That is according to the U.S. military. This marks the most serious incident to threaten troops in over a year of the U.S. targeting Yemen's Houthi rebels. Both pilots were recovered alive after ejecting from their aircraft, with one suffering minor injuries. Now, the U.S. military had conducted airstrikes targeting Yemen's Houthi rebels at the time, although the U.S. military's Central Command did not elaborate on what their mission was and did not immediately respond to questions from the Associated Press. Meanwhile, you are now taking a live look right here from southern Gaza. All of this comes following a rocket fired from Yemen, which hit an area of Tel Aviv, leaving 16 people injured by shattered glass. That is what the Israeli military shared on Saturday. This comes days after Israeli airstrikes hit Houthi rebels, who have been launching missiles in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Another 14 people had minor injuries as they rushed to shelters when air raid sirens sounded before dawn. That is according to the military. Now, the Houthis, in a statement on Telegram, said they had aimed a hypersonic ballistic missile at a military target that they did not identify. Israel's military said it was investigating, adding that, quote, "We emphasize that aerial defense is not hermetic." The Houthis' media office later reported airstrikes on Yemen's Houthi-held capital, and U.S. forces conducted airstrikes against a missile storage facility and a command facility operated by the Houthis. To talk more on this, I do want to bring in Ruthie Bloom, who is the former advisor at the office of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, as well as a senior contributing editor at Jewish News Syndicate and the co-host of Israel Undiplomatic on JNS TV. And Ruthie, we appreciate you joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie.
Absolutely. So I did want to start with the very latest involving the Houthis. And it seems now, Ruthie, that Hamas and Hezbollah, because they've become so fragmented and decimated, truly, we are seeing these continued attacks from the Houthi rebels ramp up.
Absolutely. You see, I think what they're feeling right now is that they're Iran's last proxy, and they're still standing, so to speak. I mean, after all, Israel has done quite a bit of damage to their facilities as well. However, they're flexing their muscles to show that Iran is still in business. And you mentioned that they did this in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza, but actually, they don't need to have solidarity with the Palestinians. This entire war since October 7th has been basically a war between Iran and Israel, and Iran uses its proxies. But right now, Iran is severely weakened as well, not to mention the fact that the mullahs in Tehran are very nervous about the imminent arrival of President Donald Trump in the White House in a month.
And let's talk about that. When we take a look ahead to January 20th, how does President-elect Trump taking office impact what is happening right now in the Middle East?
Well, in the first place, the impact it has is psychological because he isn't president yet. And in fact, the trouble is that there is no president of the United States. As we saw in the Wall Street Journal, a long piece about what has been going on in the Biden administration in the White House. There is no acting president. So the world is basically treating Trump as though he's already the president, though he doesn't have the authority of the president. There is a psychological element to it. And there is great fear among enemies that though Trump says, no, I don't want any wars, I'm ending all these wars, all I want is peace. And he means that. What he does not mean is what I want is to capitulate to the West's enemies. That not. He said to Israel, finish the job quickly. What he meant was obtain a victory quickly, not give up. So there's a huge difference in a perception of how things are going to go from now on in Washington as the leader of the free world as it's supposed to be.
There is, President Biden, of course, still in the White House. There is that lame duck period. And you mentioned the psychology of all of this. We've also been hearing more talks about a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Now, we have seen this stall and fall apart time and time again. How close is the latest round of negotiations going?
Well, for one thing, it's the first time since the beginning of the war and talks about hostage negotiations that Israeli officials have been way more quiet about it, and rightfully so, because it does great harm to negotiations when you have, especially if these protesters screaming, bring them home, etc. Hamas gets the message that it has more leverage. And this time, Israeli officials are really trying to keep a lid on what's going on. So the only information we have on it is from anonymous sources in Hamas, anonymous sources in this newspaper, that news outlet. And so you really can't trust it. What we're hearing we're hearing conflicting reports. But one thing we know is this: because Hamas has been decimated, and because the only leverage it has now is the hostages, it's trying very hard to be intransigent while also giving in on some of its demands. And there are certain demands, however, that Israel cannot give in on. So there is still tension in Israeli society over this, and also among the negotiators. But it does seem as though there's some more movement in this direction than there was, let's say, a month ago.
So from your perspective and your experience, is there reason to be hopeful, to be optimistic about a potential deal coming to fruition?
Yes, well, it's a mixed bag, because there are two schools of thought here in the Israeli public and among the families of the hostages. And one school of thought is you get as many hostages out as you can to rescue them, and then in stages you try to get the rest. And the other school of thought is no, you have to get them all out together, or else the ones who remain, and that includes, for example, young men who are not, let's say, infirm, elderly, or female, that you are leaving them to a fate that nobody wants, which is to say maybe we'll never see them again. So there's a big argument going on over that. Second of all, I never like to use the word ceasefire, because the whole idea here is a pause in the fighting in order to rescue these poor people. 100 of them are still there. Some are dead. Some are alive. We don't know the exact numbers. Hamas won't give us the exact names and numbers. It's so awful. And yet, we also can't afford to have another October 7th, which is what not only Hamas, but Hezbollah, all of Iran's proxies, would be happy to perpetrate. And that goes for Palestinians in the West Bank. So, we're in this terrible dilemma situation. And I'm really hoping, I am optimistic, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not going to do something that endangers, is going to do as much as he can to endanger as few people as he can.
Ruthie, so much is happening in the Middle East. We haven't even touched upon Syria just yet, as they continue to try and rebuild some sort of government after President Assad, his regime toppled, and he then fled to Russia. What are the other events and developing stories that you're keeping a very close eye on?
Well, the rebels led by al-Julani, the trouble is they're disparate rebels. They're not a unified group. They all were united in their hatred of Bashar Assad, because he's still alive, a brutal dictator, slaughtered his own people, so did his father, used chemical weapons against them, tortured them, imprisoned them. We're seeing now the opening of these prisons where people were held in appalling conditions and also killed for the smallest so-called offenses. So, they're right to have wanted to topple him, and that's a very, very good development. However, these rebels, al-Julani is really a radical terrorist. He's a jihadist. And despite the fact that he's sort of dressing differently and trying to tell the West that he has changed, because actually the Biden administration just removed the $10 million bounty on his head, which was really his aim. I think that we cannot trust him one bit. Meanwhile, there's Turkey in Syria trying to reestablish itself, trying to kill off Kurds, trying to reestablish itself as some kind of Ottoman empire. Erdogan would like to be the emperor. There's a lot of really bad stuff going on there, and the story isn't over. I would just like to add one more thing, and that is a few days ago, a tunnel between Syria and Lebanon, on the border between them, a huge 10-kilometer tunnel that fits huge trucks through it that can drive through it. 10 kilometers, I think, is about 7 or 8 miles. You do the math. And a huge tunnel through which weapons from Iran were going through Syria into Lebanon. And it was lucky that that tunnel was discovered, because you see, part of the reason that Israel has to be very vigilant about Syria is that Syria was the place through which Iran transferred its weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Ruthie, before we let you go, is there anything else that you would like to share with our viewers this morning?
Yes, I'd like to say that, you know, a missile hit, among other things, this week with the Houthis and the missiles that they fired, and one that was intercepted demolished the top floor of a building, by the way, and another that demolished a school in central Israel, that now the kids have to find another building and all that. But the one on Friday night, just so you should get an idea, that one hit a playground. There's a huge crater there in a playground next to swings. Now, it's just by miracle that nobody was killed, okay? But what you also have to understand is it's not just whether people are physically injured or killed. The entire center of the country had to rush at 4:30 in the morning into shelters. You know, you're woken up from this deep sleep. You have to run to shelters. Children are terrified. You never know, you know, and we make jokes. It's gotten to the point where we make black jokes over it. We say, well, so what are bets? You know, do we have to wear our shoes to bed tonight so we can run to the bomb shelter? Also, many of those injured in that attack were injured running to bomb shelters and falling, you know, that tripping and falling. I think this is the kind of thing you don't realize the effect, the ripple effect it has, even on people who are not directly hit or killed or seriously.
Ruthie, oh, there we go. We lost you just for a little bit, but we have you now. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here on Live Now from Fox.
And thank you again, Stephanie, for having me.